Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Erudite's sixth installment of our ShockwaveTalks series with today's topic, beating turnover from recruiting to retention. Hopefully you're all in the right place. My name is Avery Kane. I'm a senior account executive here at Erudite. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our company or this is your first Shockwave talk, Erudite empowers organizations with employee insights without having the need to run surveys. And big part of our process is we love learning and sharing insights with passionate people leaders like all of you. And in this series, we invite experts to come in to share their thoughts and their learnings so that all of us can learn as well. So again, thank you for joining us today. We hope this session is helpful. We all learn a lot, get some insightful tips on how to beat turnover with recruiting and engagement strategies. Our two guests joining us today are experts in these fields, and we're excited to pick their brain. But before I introduce them, I want to quickly go over some housekeeping reminders. First off, this is an hour-long event. We will get you out on time if you've got a hard stop. Please use the chat. When we've done these in the past, we've had great conversations throughout the entirety of the webinars. These can be questions for our speakers or just dialogues between each other on these topics as we go. Please definitely use that. And at the end of the session, we're going to try to leave a little bit of time for questions to be answered by our guests. So it's also not too late if you want to invite someone, a friend or a colleague who this talk might be helpful for. Definitely get them in, send them the link. However, if they're not able to join, that's all right. We are going to be sending out a recording link at the end here that you can definitely share. So, okay, enough of that. Really excited to introduce our two guests and just jump right into this. So first, I want to welcome Jennifer Paxton. She's a former VP of talent at Smile.io and the co-founder of Jamyr. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me. I think we might have some technical difficulties on that lovely profile picture, but it's all right. I'm so excited to chat today. I've spent most of my career, scaling startups, and recruitment and retention have been top of mind for me then, and then now transitioning to building my own business with kind of video content with employer branding. It is still top of mind. So this is something that is near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. And last but not least, I've also got Michael Brown, Vice President of Talent at Snyk. Michael, are you with us as well?
Oh, Mike, you're on mute.
You might still be on mute, Michael. There we go.
Okay, here we go. No more technical difficulties. We roll with this. So I'm Michael Brown, VP of Talent Attraction and Growth at Snyk. I actually know Jen and am glad to call her a friend. I've been in and around the talent acquisition and HR space virtually my entire 20+ long year career now, mostly focused on rapid growth tech startups. That's where I tend to call home. But retention and bringing learning opportunities forefront are near and dear to my heart as well. So I'm excited to have this chat.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you both being here. And we could probably take the next week talking about this topic. There's just so much to unpack, from retention to recruiting to engagement and all the challenges the business has had. But maybe the best place to start would just be like lay the foundation a little bit around what work has been like. And, we all know what the last few years have been like. We had a pandemic. We had this shift to remote work that happened almost overnight. We have burnout with employees, just a lot of challenges that people leaders are facing. So I'm curious, maybe Jen, I'll start with you. What do you think, if you could put your finger on it, as have the biggest impact on people leaders?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest impacts I have seen so far is just awareness and kind of how people are feeling right now. And it seems like more on a deeper level, because I remember even just a few years back, you'd have lots of engagement surveys and just like, how are people feeling? And, what's going on at the company? And it was very much at a high level of like, oh, people are feeling good or people are not feeling as recognized. But now we're getting into deeper things like people are maybe feeling lonely or disengaged or really need additional kind of mental and emotional support at the company. And so I think that people are actually expressing more of their needs. And the impact is also falling on, HR as well to express their needs and, advocate for themselves. If anything, the pandemic has proved how crucial HR and people operations is to, the viability of a business. So that's probably what I'd start with at least.
Awesome. Michael, what about you?
I think for me, I think a lot about leading through the unknown. I think that's been a big theme over since, COVID began and we all left the office for what we thought was going to be a week. And then, none of us actually returned. Right. And so, kind of adapting to the unknown and leading, teams through the unknown. How do you do that? How do you keep the morale high? How do you make your team resilient to those sort of things? That's really, where I've been spending a lot of my time, having had to lead, through a lot of this change. There's just kind of so much that you need to do to be able to kind of get your team prepared and also get yourself prepared to be able to walk through all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. With the pandemic and work from home, things like that, like how has that just changed how we work in general?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Sure. So I think, we obviously we've shifted to what's a pretty remote friendly culture these days. I think most companies, if they're not remote only, have seriously considered how they work and when they work. And so you see variations of work styles happening, whether it's virtual or flex or in person. And I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think that's here to stay. I think the flexibility that creates. The autonomy that creates for people is pretty impactful. But in general, I think the kind of this kind of like mindset of people first is here to stay, right? I think it's we've shifted from most companies at least like growth at all costs, right? Like just go and grow to more efficient growth, and so like you have to really ensure that the people that you bring on are really good and that, where you put them is going to be like a really great experience for them and that, they have the tools and the flexibility that they need to be successful.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jen?
Yeah. That people first side that you just mentioned, like it's not a fad to me. It is something that is definitely going to stay around. I mean, I think the talent market demands it. It's something that employees especially employees coming into the workforce, really expect. And I think it's something that gets, I got asked a lot in initial screenings, and I see all the content that pops up on LinkedIn around it. So I think companies are kind of under a microscope to see how they're going to lead with empathy and how they're treating their people. And I think more like candidates, but also employees are speaking up about how they're being treated just overall too.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I am curious to dive into that just a little bit more around just the focus on people first, right? I do think that, when I log into LinkedIn and I see companies talking about their initiatives and how they want to make the company a certain way and build a certain culture, some of that's brand new. I also sometimes have seen some companies, talking about productivity, or there might be a situation like a startup that's super growth minded, right? And task related, right? I am curious, it sounds like you both are in the position of thinking, this idea of people first is not a fad. This is the way business is going to be conducted. Do you that is going to be the long-term trend, or do you think that there's a chance that something could happen where that pendulum maybe swings back to where the company is focusing on other things besides just, primarily employee well-being?
I don't think the pendulum's going to swing that far back, that like people are going to go from this new normal and say like basically like go back to the way it was. Unless something, unless kind of the jobs market and the unemployment rate, goes like sky high. I don't think that pendulum is going to swing as far back as it would need to radically change the way that we are treating people these days, which, I mean, for me, I'm excited about that part of it. Like, it's something that I've been thinking about my entire career, and I'm glad companies are focusing more on it.
I totally agree. I can't even argue any of that. Maybe the only thing I would say is that it might actually swing, more in favor of people first, and go even further. I think most good leaders know that their biggest investment is their people. And so if you're going to spend all these dollars to bring these great people in, you really need to build a culture and a community that is going to engage those people and put the right tools and the processes in place so that they can be successful and continue to build their careers. Beyond that, I don't think it needs to be all that complicated.
Yeah. And there's so much data as well on just kind of employee engagement leading to productivity at a business that I think we're just going to get more and more data on that, and companies are going to realize it's a good business decision, not just a good decision to have, but a good one for their business that is going to drive the productivity of their team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Jen, I mean, one thing that's, I think, really relevant to you with Jamyr, right, is, and I know you guys aren't a huge company yet, right? But I'm sure on roadmap, as you expand and grow, you do have two different priorities, right? You've got this culture, this vision of what you want your place to be like to work at. And then you also have a bottom line to look at. And so I am curious, what do you think that looks like for companies as they're scaling and growing with, having an emphasis on both? How do they do both of them really well?
Yeah, I think for me, the very first thing comes down to how you're budgeting. And so I really want to run a company that's going to build in the employee well-being aspect and the overall strategy of the business, just like you build in a marketing budget or a tools budget. So many times I've seen companies want to support employee well-being, but then they're it's like they're having to dig in couch cushions to find the funds to do it. Right. So if they could just allocate those funds ahead of time, at least that's my theory, is allocate the funds ahead of time, and then it'll be a little bit easier to get some of these programs and get kind of some of the things that employees are really looking for, earmarked basically.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I would kind of add it. I was thinking about it, framing it maybe a little differently. It's almost like, the GSD mindset, plus culture, right? If you kind of put those two on the pendulum, they can be really at odds, right? But I think there's ways that we can have both of those things, right? We can still GSD all day long and have a lot of fun doing it, but at the same time have this really great company culture where we have clear communications, where we level set on real-time feedback and just really kind of normalize this aspect of employee well-being. I just think that's the way the world is shifting now.
Yeah, I really like the idea of employees working in just a smarter, more efficient way, so that maybe they don't have to work a 40-hour work week potentially. They could get some of their things done sooner, and if they tweaked one part of their process, it's potentially possible. So thinking about kind of even my personal, how I'm running the business right now, thinking about how I can actually do that more efficiently and what takes up the most of my time, and is there a way to do it faster and with less kind of overhead for me.
And then just to tack on to that, right? We've got parents, we've got people that want to do things outside of work, that have lives or second hustles or whatever they have, and so trying to meet them in the middle, and kind of build them some flexibility into how they need to operate in both worlds. Just makes it easier for everyone, and I think would capture their heart.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I think you definitely both agree that the focus on employee experience is here to stay. Not every company has that in place though, right today, right? And so I think one of those questions that's coming along is, where do we start, right? Driving engagement, driving retention, making that culture a place that an employee buys into and really digs in. where do you start? Like, how do you build that culture? You know, it's not the pizza party anymore that, you know, that gets people excited, right? So, you know, Michael, you talked a little bit about having flexibility and things like that. How does a company roll out an initiative to make this a priority?
Well, I think in my experience, it's been a couple of things. One is setting really strong expectations up front. So, you know, talking about what your company is and what your company isn't. Talking about, you know, what your company values and also where they draw a hard line in the sand, right? Those are some of the things that, you know, really help you understand, you know, are you going to feel like you're included, right? Is it an inclusive workforce based on who you are? But I also think there's also this element of the employee value proposition, and you know, going out and trying to understand and collect information from your current employees on, you know, what are the things that get them to come back every day? What are the exciting elements of the company? How do they talk about it, so you can understand their tone and their voice, and then really kind of building, you know, an employee value proposition that aligns truly to, you know, your employees and not just maybe your executives or the TA team. I think that's, you know, there's a couple of ways to start to, you know, like capture and retain people through that as well.
Wholeheartedly agree. I think starting with data and understanding what your employees are looking for and what they're saying is really important. You also, before even asking for the data and asking them to share their opinion, you need to come to them, to Michael's other point, like with clear expectations on how you're going to use it and what your goal is for it, to get that level of engagement, to even have them express their opinions on what they need or what they want. You know, I think companies can do this from honestly the first time you hire your first employee. I think it's a good thing to just start having that conversation very early on. The one thing I've seen go poorly with that is if companies don't focus on it and they, you know, wait until maybe they're even like 200 people, there's bad habits that have already formed that are just going to keep going and continue on and potentially bleed. So if you can catch some of those things early and how you want to work, what the company is all about and what the company isn't very early on, I think that's going to save you a lot of retention headaches in the long run too.
Totally agree. One other thing I just thought of as you were saying that, I think most people want to be told what to do. And that, it sounds weird, right? But if you give people a framework to work within, they usually they were going to work within it. And so I think if you set that framework up just right, you know, you're going to capture your people, you're going to retain your people, you're going to engage them, and they're going to feel like they're doing meaningful work. And that's the magic.
And that also speaks to the accountability side of it too, like having the employees be accountable, but also having the people team be accountable, and also having leadership be accountable. You say you're going to do something, this is how you're going to do it, and then people are looking to make sure you do it.
100%. No, it's great. It's great feedback, and you know, there's a lot of moving parts with all of this stuff, right? And there's obviously needs to be a really good plan in place on what our plan is, how we're going to roll this out, how we're going to hold our team, you know, accountable to things, how to hold our leaders accountable to things. I'm curious your thoughts on, you know, if a company thinks that they're not doing a good job with this stuff right now, is there a point in time where it makes sense for them to engage in a strategy and roll this out where things are in place, they feel really confident, or maybe they've grown to a certain point? Or do you think this is something that just every company from day one should emphasize?
Ideally, I wish it was every company from day one, but if a company isn't doing it, this is a great time to start. Like there's no kind of hindering of you starting to gather this data and getting kind of your employee voice out there as well. Yeah, I don't know, Michael, you have anything there?
No, I mean, so I've been fortunate to work at companies that have started it from the beginning, and then others that have, you know, tried to limp along and then actually execute it off on a big strategy later on. I think it's much better to start, you know, with it as a foundation, as Jen said, and you know, you can then build modularly up from there, versus having to corral everybody. And you know, as you grow and you have more and more people, the perspectives also change, right? And so you may not have, the perspective that you hoped you had, once you get bigger.
You bring up such a good point though too, Michael, of if you can get people early on as well, like think about if you were doing a pulse survey from day one. Like it was just like a habit that like everybody at the company did. So you talked about it in the interview process. New hires knew it was going to be expected of them, that they were going to get a pulse survey, every week or every month. And it was just an assumed like part of your daily or your job title. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. Yeah. And like reduce so much friction in every organization. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe that's one thing I might implement right away. Is like employee number one, let's have a pulse survey go out and see how people are feeling. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking a bit about ways to engage employees, what's important to them. But, when we talk about building a culture, it ultimately starts with who you hire. So I want to talk about recruitment, because I know that's one thing you both are really passionate about. Michael, let's start with you. What's your process? How do you find the right person for the job in today's environment?
So my team will tell you this. I say this a lot, but we slow down to speed up. So I think it's all about aligning, so if you're going to sit down and try to determine who you're going to go out and hire, it's all about figuring that out up front. It's determining what the profile looks like, what the skills look like, what's important to you, what are your non-negotiables, and then trying to build a really great profile job description that encompasses all of those things, so that you can go find that person, and then building the right process so that you can measure and have a really great experience when you do find some candidates to be talking to. And then that also allows you to move fast, through an offer, right? And that gives you like the opportunity to show commitment, and make sure that the momentum that you've created in your process, stays there. I think, that's I just simplified it for everybody, but that's, the nuts and bolts of it right there.
And to piggyback off that, I mean, the alignment from the recruiting team, but also the alignment with the hiring manager and the rest of the interview team too, having everybody have kind of the right calibration for the skills they're looking for and what is good versus what is great, really helps streamline that, like that interview debrief process too, where maybe you have more people aligned on, how they're going to say like, yeah, this is a great hire, or this is a good hire, or anything like that.
Yeah, the kickoffs are like the beginning is just like where you can really kind of define a lot of good things too, and you can decide, do you want this person to be a diverse hire, right? You could go out and be really forefront and thinking strategically that way. You could think about do you want this person to come from a underrepresented group out there? Do you want them to be coming from a top school? Do you want, like, you can really start to understand a lot about the hiring teams as well based on their asks, and it just goes back to creating the alignment, and then also it's that ability to influence. So if you know exactly what they're looking for, you can sometimes influence in certain ways to get the job done too.
I also think those kickoff meetings are a great opportunity for the hiring managers to understand where the gaps are on their team too, and how this new hire could potentially fill those gaps as well, from an experience level or a background level as well. I think if you get the kickoff meeting right and set kind of the expectations for the entire interview process, it's going to go so much smoother and so much quicker too, and just a better overall candidate experience too.
Awesome. One thing I've heard from recruiters is that with work from home, you just now have this huge audience of people you can pick from, right? Like you're no longer constrained to your 20 miles away from your office, right? And there's so many positives that come with that. I've also heard that it can be challenging because you almost have so many options that it's maybe hard to narrow it down. And so I'm curious, have you both seen positives or negatives from that change in the last few years regarding hiring?
I think one of the first things for me has been just the level of like the sheer overwhelmingness of getting so many applicants that you can't even get to every single person into like throughout the entire interview process. So actually Hotjar posted recently, I think they had like, oh, I can't even remember how many applicants. It was like thousands and thousands of applicants for their company this year. And they're a smaller team. So it was kind of astonishing that they got that many applicants. But I was thinking about it from a recruiter standpoint, saying, you know, I'm one recruiter and I need to get through, 500 applications and see which ones are going to be the best fit for the role. And there's only X amount of hours in the day. I'm not just looking at resumes. I'm doing kind of phone screens and potentially doing some coordination. I'm doing kickoffs. So how do you balance getting to every single person and giving every single person a good experience with kind of the overwhelming number of people that are applying? On the flip side of that, I actually spoke with a friend today with her job search, and she said that she applied for 200 roles. So she has a spreadsheet of all these different companies that she's applying for. And so she is also exhausted. So it's not just on the recruiter side, but candidates are also exhausted from applying to so many different roles. And I wish there was a way that we could tamper down some of that exhaustion or that level of kind of like feeling of overwhelm or being overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Jen. Different perspective, but on the same lines. I'm also finding it to be, slightly difficult, right? There's a few things that make it difficult, right? One is time zone. Time zone haven't changed. Just because we all are home now, time zones are still the same. And making sure that you have really great overlaps if you have a global team is really, really important. And so making sure that you rein in your hiring managers on that point is really can be really tricky. I also think that to Jen's point, I think the person that had to apply to 200 jobs, on top of that, they're at home, right? They're isolated, they're disconnected, they're by themselves potentially, and that can also be a pretty negative. On the positive though, to Jen's points, flexibility, the inclusion, the balance, there is a much larger talent pool than we had. I had recruited for a company a long time ago that was all about remote, and we didn't know we were forethinkers on that, but we were just going where the talent was, and fortunately/unfortunately for us, the talent was not in Massachusetts, and so we were looking everywhere for it, and it ended up being a global perspective. One last piece on this: if you go too global though, then your time zones spread out so much that it becomes very hard to connect your company back together, and also the cost associated to employing people around the globe becomes very, very expensive. So I think those are just a couple of barriers that need to be thought through holistically.
One more piggyback off of Michael's thing, because global, I love global and being able to work in different time zones, but the one part that is like the Achilles heel or can really make or break sometimes is the way that people are working, the asynchronous communication versus the synchronous communication. Because I had a team at my last company that had people in 11 different time zones, which meant they maybe had 30 minutes where their entire team overlapped, maybe. And so they had to figure out a way of working. And if you're new to that, it's a new skill you have to learn. So that's also challenging. So I think also in those kickoff meetings, really having a candid conversation with the hiring manager about like the team's capability of working across time zones is really important. I've kind of added that in as a line item at this point.
Yeah, super interesting. And there's so many things to think about with that process. One thing that you both kind of alluded to is the scale, right? Now that the talent pool is so much bigger and there's so many other options now. One thing starting to come up is AI or tech that's helping recruiters with this process. And I think that's something that a lot of HR companies and recruiters are starting to just dip their toe in and figure out how to use. So I'm curious, and Jen, I know this is right up your alley, so maybe we'll start with you on this side. What have you seen that's out there? What have you seen work or not work? And how can these types of tools be effective for recruiters?
I feel like I have a love-hate relationship, Michael. I don't know about you. There's a part of me that really loves kind of the AI side of it because it potentially gets down to the heart of the people. But then there's so many flaws that you really can't get that haven't been, corrected and kind of perfected yet with AI from incorporating in bias into it. I also, I remember years back when applicant tracking systems did have a few kind of weeding out parts of the job description. So if you, and like of your resume, so if you forgot to put in like the applicant tracking system that you worked for, you were booted. It's like a lot of recruiters out there. I don't know about you, but one applicant tracking system, you can learn another one pretty quickly. But like that was a deciding factor to kick somebody out. So I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with more AI coming in. The part that I like potentially is that it could potentially save time. But if it's costing us authenticity and human connection, I have a strong problem with AI doing that. Candidates don't want to just talk to a bot. They want to talk to a human. So sorry, soapbox off.
No, that was great. And I don't have a whole lot to add. I think there's efficiency gains, to Jen's point, that you can find. But there's also flaws, just like anything. And so it does become a matter of, how much do you trust it? When you do put it to work. I've also seen, some of the new stuff, the chat, we'll just call it out, chat GPT hashtag. But it's everywhere right now, but it's pretty powerful too. And my we've been playing with it on the side and we've all been, I think all of us have been playing with it nonetheless. And there's some really interesting things that I think we'll be able to do, going forward. But again, it comes back to the human connection. And to me, it's not about the tool itself. It's about the efficiency gain that the tool creates for the team. And so if the tool allows the team to have more time having real human conversation and connection, then that's probably a good thing. If it makes the process more complicated, probably not a good thing, right? And so, there's definitely some trade-offs that you'll have to walk through, if you do decide to implement one of these types of tools.
Yeah. Awesome. Before we move on to another topic, I just want to remind everyone, please do use the chat to put in any questions. We're going to spend some time at the end here, and they'll be able to address those questions directly. I'm going to transition kind of to the last main topic here, which, recruiting obviously is where it starts, but I think most companies are looking today, like what can we do to move the needle? So that conversation centers around engagement of the current workforce that they have. So let's just start with the foundation, like table stake stuff. As an HR leader, what strategies are you implementing to not only understand your employees, but to impact their engagement and their satisfaction at their job? Jen, let's maybe start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a big fan of surveys. If they're done, the right way and kind of with the accountability and action piece attached to it. But I've been focusing on a few kind of clear buckets. So overall happiness, relationship with manager, recognition, and work-life balance. So I try and bucket the questions into one of those particular themes, mostly because people leave bad managers more than they leave bad companies. I still believe that. But also with kind of the layoffs that are happening right now, there's kind of twofold to that is people are feeling either that they are having to pick up additional work and additionally prove themselves more so that they do not get caught up in the next round of layoffs, which leads to the recognition piece, which is if people are doing an amazing job, are you telling them that? Are you reinforcing positive behavior? And then all of those kind of lead to and make up kind of the overall happiness. So I'm a big fan of using pulse surveys to start kind of understanding employee engagement and where it can go from here.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it all starts with listening. And whether it's I love a pulse, but if it's the annual Big Bang engagement survey, regardless of what it is, I think it's great for any company to be listening, and doing the surveys and collecting the feedback. But as we all know, if there's no action behind it, it's all for none. And so making sure that there's a clear action plan and communication that comes from those surveys. I also think that there's a couple of other buckets that Jen didn't mention that I think are also important, but I think the ones Jen mentioned are probably the most important. But one is really, really clear communication, and cascading communication, making sure that the message is coming all the way from the top down, and it's really clear, and the talking points stay consistent, and it might be kind of shifted, for its audience over as it makes its way down, but making sure that those communications are really crystal clear. I think building careers internally is also a big engagement piece right now. There's a lot of people that, with all the layoffs that are happening right now, there's a lot of people that have either entered the market, or there's a lot of people that have now decided, I'm going to hunker down. And, those people that have decided to hunker down, that's our opportunity, right? Those are the people that we have the opportunity to engage and retain and find new ways to build, careers, hopefully internally. So I think a lot about that. And then the only other piece, and I think Jen mentioned this, but the manager enablement, that middle tier of managers is the one that's always neglected at every company I've ever been at or talked to or worked for, or it's just that area that tends to be neglected. And part of that's because you've got people that as these companies grow and mature, they get tapped to become managers, and they weren't managers prior, or you've got managers that are coming in with previous either bad habits or good habits, but they're coming in with habits, and so making sure that you're level setting across the organization on what the expectation is on what it is to be a manager, and then the associated tools on how to be a great one, I think are really, really important.
Awesome. Yeah. So one thing that just came out fairly recently was the new Gallup poll for 2022. It was pretty shocking, at least in my opinion. It came up that 21% of the workforce is engaged in their work. And I thought about it from the other side of the coin, that 79% of people were not engaged in their work, which just seems like a really high number. So I'm curious to just get your opinions on that figure by itself. Like, how did we get to that point? And what do companies need to do if they feel like that's a representation of their company? Where do they need to start today to kind of fix this? Because I see, if we want to run surveys to get a better pulse of them, and they maybe just went through layoffs, are people going to give them, are they going to kind of stick their neck out and give feedback? And those types of questions come out. It's like, so where do you start as a company if you feel like that is actually a representation of your organization?
I'll give it a stab here. I think one of the things that can be really impactful is the concept of a stay interview. And it goes back to listening. It's all listening at the end of the day, Avery. It's asking questions and being human about it, right? Having a human moment with your team to understand what is either keeping them there or driving them to leave, or asking the question, what's it going to take to keep you here for the next 3 years, right? It's a great question. It makes you think, and I think starting with an interview, one of those types of interviews, and it doesn't even have to be formal. It can be informal. You can do it in a one-on-one. I think that's where you start.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Is that kind of where you see that middle manager that kind of doesn't get as much love and attention? Is that kind of where those areas where that person can really shine?
Definitely. That is exactly where they can shine, because they can have those conversations, and they can show their teams that they're either bought in, right? And they can kind of model some of that behavior for their teams. They can also, try to advocate for their teams as well, based on what they hear.
Yeah. I wrote down more ear service when you were talking. More ear service, less lip service. I think it does all start with listening, and that's kind of where you know where to go from where you are now. I think also just with everything that's happening, I'm not surprised about the 21%. With the layoffs and the level of uncertainty within the economy, I think people are trying to find their footing, and it's very hard to like keep yourself engaged when you're just like when you're just worried, like, do I have a job tomorrow? My company gave me 2 weeks notice to know if I was going to get let go. I don't know how much productivity companies think their employees are going to give during that 2 weeks notice of when they just let everybody know that, hey, there's going to be a layoff. Like, people are in panic state. They're not in engaged state at that point. So I think what companies can do though is recognize where they are, and if they were at fault, be open and honest about it, and but then also come with, here's our plan. We recognize where our mistakes were. Here's what we're going to do to move forward and to get through this. And we want you to help us get through this. We want to work together with you. So come to us with your feedback and your improvements, and what you want to do. If you have ideas on innovation of how to do more with less, as people have also said. But yeah, I think you're right, Michael. It has to start with listening, and then you go from there.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick has a comment in the chat here. He talked with someone in HR. How do you deal with attrition snowballing after layoffs happen? I think I think layoffs are kind of the elephant in the room with a lot of companies right now talking about how to keep employees engaged. And so I am curious on that topic that Patrick mentioned, what your approach would be.
It's really hard. I think, and you're going to, I think after every layoff, and it's funny, I was trying to find if there was a benchmark at one point in time, post layoff, what's the attrition benchmark that, you'd potentially see. I couldn't find anything, but it'd be interesting if there was one. But I think it's you've got to be real. You can't paint everything through rose-colored glass. It's got to be a very, real kind of experience for people. And the more resiliency that you build into your teams, the more real you can be. The more you can talk about, how the economy impacts the company, or how, the impacts that you had to make to the company are negative for certain people. I think you can have those. But I also think, you have to, on the flip of that, you also have to be positive about things. You have to be positive about the outlook. You have to be positive about the culture. You have to be positive about, the future and the growth. And I think so. You have to. There's a real balance that you have to find there. The other piece is that you need to be able to offer. I think offering growth opportunities to people after a layoff is the name of the game. And sometimes after a layoff, teams shape shift, and there's potential opportunity for people to pick up a different department or another task, or expand their role in a way that they hadn't thought of before. And now sometimes some may call that loading people up, but other people may look at that as a real opportunity to build their career and drive in a direction that they hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. Awesome. The one thing I think I'd add, Michael, because you nailed that one, like, it should be like your pinned, answer. It's amazing. The one thing I might add, which is actually something you had said earlier about just communication, because it starts to snowball when people do not feel that you're being truthful, or if people feel like you didn't treat employees with empathy, or you start to get a bad kind of reputation when that happens, and people don't want to work for a company like that. So if you can actually take a little bit more time up front, and I know like not everybody has infinite amount of time before a layoff. I've heard some horror stories recently that people basically had 8 hours before they knew that they were going to be laying off their like half of the organization. So like I understand that like that time thing can happen, but sometimes if you can plan your comms ahead of time, you can mitigate some of that snowballing as well. This is not going to be a very a popular opinion or a popular thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Most of the times, at least the rifts that I have been in and the rifts that I have heard, some of them recently, companies are actually kind of accounting for a little bit of additional attrition. And so they're not cutting as deeply because they're already accounting for it. And I know that's horrible to say publicly and everything, but it is something I think that maybe, any of the HR leaders might even think like, yep, that was our company. But I don't know.
On the flip of that, I've seen, companies decide to go a bit deeper, and kind of use that as an opportunity to either right size or change, shapeshift, what they're doing. The other thing that can help companies stop from snowballing when it comes to attrition is retention and retention packages. I'm not saying that everyone should just go out and pay for everyone to stay, but those that are your key performers, your top talent, there's a definite opportunity to either layer in additional equity or equity is probably the best, but or additional cash for that to keep them in the business, or to keep them vesting longer, if you will. That can also help.
Oh, that's good. So let's say we're a company that is taking this, we have a very intentional plan for our recruitment. We have a really intentional plan for how we're going to engage our employees. We're going to roll this thing out. How do they check in with themselves? How do they check the progress over the course of time? What are the benchmarks that they're setting? And how are they measuring how effective that plan and rollout is? What would you suggest, someone in HR or in leadership position really measures the effectiveness of these strategies? Although, whoever wants to go first, I don't know.
I mean, I think we're going to say the same thing.
Yeah, probably go for it. Go.
Pulse. Yeah. So I think it's, I think you got to keep asking. It's not, that's why, the one and done engagement survey is a tricky thing to do, and why, a pulsing strategy, helps you really understand, the heartbeat of the company, AKA the pulse. And so, that gives you more real-time opportunity to measure and flex, and also pivot. Like, that's part of these action plans. Or, sometimes you head down a path and you quickly realize this is not the path we needed to be going down, or we're not driving the outcome that we had hoped we were from this plan. And so pivoting is also a really good thing. And by pulsing constantly, it gives you that opportunity to reset the clock, and then be able to continue to measure without having to do the big bang all over again.
One other thing that I have found, it's not as easy to do as I would have hoped, but one other thing I have found is find a few employees at the company. They don't have to be leaders. They can be individual contributors. They could be mid-managers, but people that you can build a safe space with for them to come directly to you. And figure that out. I've done it in focus groups before sometimes, but I've also had just a handful of employees that do not pull any punches, and they come to me with those. And I think it's been a great learning experience for me on that end of, this is what's being said in the Slack underbelly that I never get to experience. I'd rather know what that was and hear it than just think everything is fine on the surface. It's like the duck,
Yeah, totally. And to that point, Jen, some of the people in your organization that tend to know the most are they're sometimes the most junior people in the organization too. Yeah. Right. And but the perspective that they bring and their ear to the ground is so good that it's really important to pull those people in too. I've had in past company built this thing where we called it safe space lunch, and we had rules. It wasn't fully, it was very safe, but not completely safe. And you could bring anything. It was anything that was on your mind, and you could bring it and talk about it. Sometimes the topics were spicy and sometimes they weren't, but it was a great way to air concerns, and not anonymously. Hate anonymous.
Awesome. Very good. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. It's normally the time where we want to make sure we open it up to the floor to get any specific questions from anyone in our audience. So please do put in any questions you want Jen or Michael to address. While we wait for those to come in, Michael and Jen, I don't know if you have any like last thoughts or anything that we haven't talked about today so far that you find to be really crucial. If you were talking to someone that's a people leader and they're asking you about 2023 and like, where do we go from here? We feel like we're in the Gallup poll statistic bucket. We feel like we need to find a way out. What would you tell them that we haven't already talked about here today so far?
I mean, I think we touched on it at the beginning, ever so slightly, but I honestly, I think, as companies start to shift, their budgets, and stop doing as much hiring as they used to be doing, I really think the opportunity to help people build careers internally is the name of the game. And whether, with the gold standard of getting to a place where maybe you can actually even recruit internally, that is, if you can get there, I believe that's when your organization is like really forward thinking. They have the comfortability around the transition conversation, or the manager's comfortable losing their best performer because they know it's in their best interest to go to that next team. And so if you can get to a place where everybody is very comfortable with this, that's when you'll be able to create a ton of engagement and truly build and capture people to build their careers internally. Mm-hmm. That's where I hope things continue to go.
Yeah. I also want to like think about and have people think more about kind of the contingency planning and the succession planning, because that goes to your point, Michael, about, getting growth paths for people. And I think that those mid-level managers and kind of the leaders could even have more conversations around if they left, or if we had to do a ref or something, what would happen and how could they repurpose their team? Yeah.
Interesting. Awesome. Michael, you talked about the internal promotion and creating like those types of opportunities for people. I think one thing that when I've talked to a lot of HR leaders recently, they think they're skewing the reasons people are leaving their company. They really believe it's compensation. And I think part of that is because they're seeing a lot of turnover in certain areas around like engineering, things like that, where there's certain parts of the org that are experiencing more than others. And, there is an element of, you have some data, but then you also have some subjectivity or like exit interviews, right? Where you're trying to glean some information on why people are leaving. Do you think people are job hopping the way they are primarily because of money? Or do you think that there really is a lot of other factors and that's really the reason people are leaving?
My personal opinion on that one is that people are not leaving for compensation. I think that's the added bonus of job hopping, is that you get to ratchet up faster than maybe you would have if you were staying internally. I think it's about skills. I think it's people have started to recognize, the opportunities that they want to get themselves into in the future. And so therefore it becomes about building or collecting the skills needed to be able to get to that job. And so that's where I think things are. That's why I think, the skills over compensation kind of argument is it's an easy one, right? I think, and in a lot of cases, it's easy. It's also easy for companies to measure that too, from an attrition perspective. I've seen multiple attrition spikes over my career. Different points in time, and I can't remember one that really kind of came back to an analysis that where we landed on compensation being the primary thing.
If you would have asked me in 2022 this question, I would have talked about the compensation side, because there was there's so many kind of conversations I was having where people would talk about like their offer letter they were getting, or they were having to make offers like $20K above what the budget was. I'm not hearing that as much anymore. So Michael, I do agree with you. I don't think it's on the compensation side. I also think that there might be a direct correlation to burnout and skills development. Because people, if they're doing the same role and they're not growing, they're not learning, and they're feeling like they're in this rut, then they're feeling burnt out. And there's a lot of people feeling burnt out in many different ways, but one is kind of on the learning side. So I think that is one area that it doesn't take a lot of finances. It takes some finances, but not as much as, giving a person a $20K raise, but to help develop their skills. And it takes time and attention for that part of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Great discussion, both of you. Thank you so much. We are getting close to time here. And so I just want to wrap up. And first off, for all of you watching this, please definitely give a follow to Jen and Michael. They're outstanding. They've got great content, and they're thought leaders in this space. So we really appreciate both of you being part of this and just sharing your learnings with all of us. There is a recording that will be coming out right after we're done here. We'll send that out to everyone that attended. Appreciate everyone coming. Michael or Jen, do you guys have any last thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, thank you for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Thanks, April.
Right. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. We'll see you at the next one. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.